I'm delighted that we have got a really distinguished panel with some fantastic insights, and they're going to take the well-being agenda and talk about it in a bit more broad sense. Now, 30% of frontline people think about money all the time, every single day. It's one part of a wellbeing strategy. What we want to really think about now is what should be in a wellbeing strategy, how you keep it on an agenda, but also, most importantly, how do you influence your board in terms of taking action and putting money behind it? And there's a real business benefit for doing this. When you put in a great strategy on wellbeing, you see absence go down, you see motivation go up. And that's the kind of data and insights that your board want to hear. It's not always that easy to do though, and I think being persistent and having that passion to keep talking about the agenda is really key, and that's what our panel are going to do for you in just a few moments. So I'd like to introduce who they are. We've got Martin Jones on the end there. Martin is, some of you might know him actually, he's the CEO for UK and International of Home Instead, and has worked tirelessly throughout his whole career in the care sector, raising the agenda and keeping the conversation going about how to represent those workers. So delighted that you're here, Martin, and thank you for taking the time. Peter Cheese, he's the CIPD CEO, and again, you know, is talking daily about the needs of employees and the role of employers and the responsibility that unions can take in order to make that group and that body more representative and have meaningful impact. He's also doing a huge amount of work, as you could expect, with the government as we trip into the 100 days of Labour government and what they're talking about in terms of day one rights. So delighted that you're here. Thank you. Helen Dickinson, she's the CEO of the British Retail Consortium. So for many of you, she's representative of the industries and organisations that you serve in. And Helen, you will probably recognise her. She's on TV an awful lot in terms of championing the worker, talking about some of the really key issues that people are facing at the moment in retail. And, you know, if you're from a sector that isn't retail, everything that Helen will talk about will resonate with you. And Natasha Rice, who is the Reward Director at Tesco, and I'm delighted that Natasha is here. And she'll talk, she's actually, you know, she would probably downplay her role, but she is a real natural agitator. And what she'll do is she'll talk to you about the persistence that she's had to have to keep wellbeing on the agenda at Tesco. So please welcome them, and I look forward to a very interesting debate. So a round of applause, please. I think, Peter, I'd probably like to start with you for a number of reasons, really, both because you've got a role as a CEO, so within your own business you're a CEO, but also because of the role that you play across the UK. And, you know, I know you've got lots of thoughts on this, but what is it that you want to share, really, with the audience today?
Yeah, thanks, Trace, and great to have the opportunity to talk about these things. And you said, expand perhaps the thinking. I mean, financial well-being, as we know, is a critical part of well-being overall, and I know there's been a lot of conversation about that this morning already. But it is the idea of well-being seen as something strategic. It's a strategic fundamental in terms of ensuring that our workforces are able to work, that they can work effectively, that they're engaged, that we reduce absenteeism and things like that. And yet here we are in a context where we are seeing the highest rates of absenteeism that we've seen in decades. There's some post-COVID aspects to that. But also, mental health and stress at work has become much higher on everybody's agenda, and it is playing out in the fact that I think we're now about 7.8 days of absence per worker per year on average, where we'd been more in the sort of 4s or 5s. And as I said, a lot of it is being linked increasingly to what we see as mental health and well-being, and particularly stress. Now, we know that financial well-being, as Teresa's already touched on, is part of what can create stress. So there's a whole different sort of dynamic and discussion going on about how do we support mental health as well as physical health, and recognizing that financial well-being is all part of that broader picture. And as I started with, seeing well-being as part of a strategy, and having a strategy for well-being, and not just necessarily sort of ad hoc trying to deal with issues as they arise. Now, we do a lot of research in this space. I've always been a passionate advocate for wellbeing. I sit on a whole number of wellbeing forums, and when I write about the subject of wellbeing, I think it should be a long-term outcome of work. When we're trying to position work to be good for us, and all the things we talk about in a modern workplace, flexible working, support for work-life integration, more supportive cultures, reducing conflict and bullying and harassment, all these things should be pointed towards the idea that it is a strategic outcome of good work is well-being. And that well-being, as I said, links therefore directly into really, really important business outcomes. But part of the research we do every year, I think it is every year, we publish a research with Simply Health, and we've done it for 23 years, looking at the progress of wellbeing in organisations today. And just quickly, because I know we're going to move on, but about 50% of businesses would say they have a wellbeing strategy, about 50%. The rest are saying, well, it's a bit more ad hoc and it sort of depends on the need and so forth. And then to echo Teresa's point, what we have seen is, particularly through times of hardship, financial crisis and uncertainty, is some of the money is being pulled away from well-being, just as I'm seeing it also in areas like diversity and inclusion. Now, why is that happening? Part of the reason that it's happening, and I know other panelists will pick this theme up, is because we haven't always connected well enough the idea of what I've started by saying, that well-being should be seen as a strategic imperative, which will deliver real business outcomes if you can support it, attraction, retention, engagement, productivity, and so on. So we still, in other words, I think, have work to do in terms of seeing well-being as critical to business strategy and all the different elements that come behind that. And just very quickly, the final thing I would say is that I think, under the new government, today there's been a lot of announcements about the Employment Rights Bill. There are many things that you can look in that Employment Rights Bill and the Make Work Pay agenda that the Labour government have, which are pointing much more, actually, to the ideas of well-being. They're pointing to things like better support for parental leave, bereavement, menopause, statutory sick pay, how we change some of these dynamics to encourage business more to look at some of these things in a more strategic way. So there's some interesting things coming through, I think, also from, if you will, the governance and political side on this.
I think that's right. As I look around the audience, I know a lot of you are in roles where you're shaping policy and you're key decision makers. And I'm proud, actually, if you think about the last 30 years of the workplace movements that have happened in terms of maternity rights, paternity rights, etc. When you get the data, when you get groups of people that say, actually, there is something that's really, really important, change happens. So probably a good time to talk to Natasha really about what Tesco have done, because there's been a well-being agenda for a long, long time, but there's pitfalls, there's opportunities. Talk to the audience perhaps about how you've navigated that and what your learnings are.
Yeah. So just building on what Peter says, I think having really clear view on what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve through any well-being initiatives or strategy that you put together is really important. So for Tesco, we do look at our measures of success quite rigorously, I would say. So whether that is absence or productivity, attraction and retention from a competitive point of view, but also there are cultural outcomes as well, for me as well. I think having the rigour of that data is really important, but you might have a suite of programs that you've got in place already, so you need to know your numbers on what the engagement is on that, what the gaps are that you're trying to solve, why you're trying to solve that, why what you have today doesn't work, and being able to just lay that out really clearly. If you don't have that, you can't even enter the door really to have the conversation. But I do think having a real focus on what's the most important thing is really important. In the wellbeing agenda, there's so much that we can do, from financial wellbeing, physical, mental, it's a really, really broad topic. And there's a danger, I think, that you can end up throwing a load of stuff at the wall and hoping that something's going to stick.
Yeah.
And the way that at Tesco we've got really clear on what's important is we've asked our colleagues. So we've spent a long time getting really, really good colleague insight about what really would make a difference to them. And it's difficult to argue with that, really, when you present that to the executive committee. This is what we think is most important.
How open have the board been in terms of, and this is probably something for everyone to think about, how open are the board in listening to feedback, the data, and just about how people are feeling?
Well, at Tesco, we're lucky, I suppose. We are very open to that. But I think we work in a business where it's really clear that our employee and colleague experience will directly impact our customer experience. So that understanding that well-being is an absolute business imperative, as well as being a competitive edge, is understood. But I think the topics that we then are covering within that wellbeing agenda, that's what's changed so much over the last few years.
Yeah.
So you have different generations across Tesco. Because we're such a massive employer, we are an absolute representation of British society. And so you have generations that are comfortable talking about mental health, you have generations that really aren't. So when it comes to things like mental health, weaving in and taking opportunities to take that topic and weave it into performance management or our line manager training or into our conversations around culture, that's how you then get more of a traction. And it's not just, here's an initiative, we've got a document, we've put it on an intranet, it's there, and we're done.
So that thread's got to flow through every initiative that you've got that touches people.
Yeah.
If you want to be able to get the insights that you're looking for and take the action that you want to take.
And I think as well, the way that we get things done in our world of work in HR is, we take our proposals to the groups of people that approve them or not, and then we implement them, don't we? But I think for me, wellbeing is so much around culture, because so much of doing it well is based on having really good conversations between colleagues and their managers, or between colleagues and themselves. And so, I was joking with the others before we came in that I like to think of myself as a positive irritant in the organisation. So there was and I think you just have to take your chances when you see them to play that role and lead the conversations that you want in your organisation about the topics that you're passionate, that you think will make a difference. So an opportunity presented itself to me last year. Our top sort of 50 leaders were getting together, as they do 2 or 3 times a year, to talk about strategy. And at their previous meeting, they'd had a reflection that the work to do over the next year or two looked a lot, and we've already had a lot coming out of, working through COVID, coming out of COVID. It's been pretty relentless. And a few of them were having a reflection that, we should talk about wellbeing because we've got a lot to do, and how are we going to look after ourselves? And we could have had a session with them that was very much about, are you drinking enough water, and are you taking enough exercise, and are you sleeping enough, and that kind of thing. But I also know that at Tesco, mental health is now the number 2 reason for short-term absence. It's in the top 3 for long-term absence, and it wasn't like that before. So mental health is becoming more and more of an issue, as Peter says. So I thought, right, I'm going to use this opportunity not just to talk about exercise and drinking water, but we used it as an opportunity to get the 50 of them feeling comfortable to show their own vulnerability to each other, and be able to have proper, deep conversations in their teams about well-being on a level that we've not done before. And so we are changing the culture of Tesco by doing that. So it's like kind of starting a bit of a revolution in that group. And it's working really well. And we've launched a massive campaign around mental health again only this week. But we've got all of the leadership engaged in a way that we didn't have a year ago ahead of doing that. So this is the thing, I think you've got to try and just seize your opportunities where you see them to kind of poke an issue that's important, as well as having all your data and everything that proves that what you're doing is going to make a difference. But ultimately, for me, the outcome at Tesco is I want colleagues at Tesco, I want their wellbeing to be better because they work at Tesco. That's what we're working to.
And
Ultimately.
I think showing empathy and stepping into somebody else's shoes, it's a big leap of faith. Even starting a conversation to say, how are you feeling? People will say, fine, fine. Because they really do not want you to dig deep, and you might not feel comfortable to dig deep either. But trying to find those opportunities where you can have that conversation and start to really listen and understand what's going on is important. Martin, you've got a phenomenal role in terms of the global network that you've got. So a slightly different model to Tesco across an industry where, we all look and think, oh my God, the care workers, it's difficult to find them, it's difficult to keep them. We know in terms of the front line, they're not the greatest paid. So you've got huge challenges. How does this resonate with you? And I guess wearing that hat, what's the impact and how do you play your role to it?
Big question. So in Home Instead, it's probably a brand that most of you never even heard of, in truth. So it's a brand that, synonymous with home care, looking after older people. And Tree's just made a really good point. What was a big change for us in terms of our wellbeing kind of strategy was COVID. We had a lot of home care workers out at the sharp end, looking after older people, and obviously older people were the biggest threat in society in terms of, unfortunately, they were a threat in terms of COVID, more susceptible to it, and we actually lost some care workers during that time. So that, in terms of for the rest of the care worker population that we have, which is just shy of 20,000 people just across the UK, mental health, as you've just been talked about, became quite a big issue for us. So we had to think about, well, we had a wellbeing agenda before, we had a lot of policies and procedures, and what you were saying before at Tesco, things that you did to help and support the workforce, but they weren't targeted. So we actually started to talk to our care workers more than ever before. We'd always done an annual survey, always got the feedback, and that was fantastic and good. But COVID for us really changed the narrative. And just to give you a context of social care, just in social care in its own, that sector employs more people than agriculture. We've got 165,000 vacancies as we sit here today. And with the ageing population, that's just going to get expanded and worse and more challenging. So we set up a co-workers council, and we really started to ask, what can we do that's actually going to make a difference to you guys at the front end? Because it wasn't just about, as I mentioned before, chucking mud at a wall. So we started to listen, take some real clear advice, really. And because the lone workers, and they're going out to Mrs. Jones's flat and providing absolutely important care for Mrs. Jones to stay well and safe in her own home. Yes, they're getting the support and the financial support as well, and we put different initiatives in there. But often it was just having simple touch points. How are you? How are you feeling today? Because they've maybe seen 2 or 3 clients. And it's not necessarily they've had a difficult call on those two or three clients, but they've got the life as well as the day job. So how do you balance that? And we've set it up in terms of, because the lone workers, so we can't see every single person every single day. So we've used technology with that, we've used apps in that, we've used constant communications, we've used drop-ins. So that's made a big, but mental health has soared, unfortunately, within Home Instead, but unsurprisingly, in terms of what the care workforce has gone through. And this is a challenge that we're looking at within the whole of social care. So I'm also chair of the Care Workers Charity in the sense, and the amount of calls we got to our helpline, obviously through COVID was soul destroying in terms of some of the stories, but since then, in terms of people who want to be a care worker because it's a vocation. That's what really drives them forward. And then the struggles I've had since then in terms of coming to take, and because I've seen clients pass away more than I've ever seen clients, and that anybody, that's a challenge. So the more support, the more infrastructure, the more touch points, technology you can really wrap them up in is really important. So we've set up a new program. It's just called Trust, to, because we want them to open up, we want them to talk to us, we want them to, that we are together.
Yeah.
So we've got to trust them together in terms of our campaign, and we're keeping it quite focused. I think it was mentioned before in terms of Tesco.
I think it's really useful. You talk about the role that technology can play as well. When you've got touch points that anything that you can use that brings the focus back. And I guess a lot of care workers are in a situation where they could be suffering from mental health themselves. And some of the people that they are meeting on a day-to-day basis, those 3 calls or 4 calls that they have a day, they could be people that have got mental health issues as well. So, it compounds it even further.
And it's not just actually the people are seeing, it's actually family members as well.
Yeah.
Because you could become a trusted confidant within, so it's quite a big role in terms of offering that support. And obviously you need the support to offer the support. But what was mentioned before, one final thing from me is, one of our outcomes is, obviously, it's a relationship-driven business.
Yeah.
So you've got to have a care worker who's for your valued and pride when they're actually going to serve a client to make the biggest difference. So that's what we look at in terms of massive outcome in terms of the business for them, and obviously from a business perspective for the data.
Yeah, data and listening and them connections. Helen, you represent retail
where to
across
start.
the UK. I don't know. But
Really.
you see firsthand the types of things that Martin has been describing and Peter has been championing and Natasha's been trying to fix.
I mean, I think the real challenge from a retail point of view is if it wasn't an important strategic agenda item before, then it definitely is now, because the data, Retail Trust Pool do an annual survey of people right across the industry, and 80% of retail workers have seen a deterioration in their mental health in the last 12 months. 80%. And that's, there are 3 million people who work in retail, so that's a lot of challenge to address. And the reasons that are sort of cited behind that is work-life balance, which I think has probably, been part of, the discussion for a long time. But then you add to that, the financial impacts of the cost of living crunch, particularly for lots of people. And for those that work in frontline retail, I can't even say it on a Thursday afternoon after a busy week, the word stratospheric rise in violence and abuse and crime within, and particularly whether it's in a shop, for delivery drivers, or customer service centres. So that particular aspect, I think, has been very high on the agenda in many retail boardrooms, and lots of investment is going into both, I think, the what can be done to mitigate some of the causes. So that takes you into sort of de-escalation training, the body-worn camera, the physical responses of some businesses, body-worn cameras, security guards, and all the rest of it, as well as the support for people who've been directly impacted, and for the colleagues of those people, and potentially, given the knock-on implications on their families as well. So I guess the sort of the retail perspective is there is a burning platform, and some of the things that Natasha is talking about really making the link to the sort of the business outcomes. I still think that this is a great example of a great business that's doing some great things. There are probably not enough businesses that are doing enough. So how you can make the link from a it just feels like the right thing to do to support our people, to the business consequences, the strategic consequences of high absenteeism, high turnover, and what the cost of that might be to a company. And I think the point that was coming through from what Martin was saying is, how do line managers, people within the business, how do you really empower them to be part of the solution, rather than everybody sort of looks up and goes, right, well, the senior leadership or the board is not doing enough, and so it really does have to become sort of a movement or part of the culture. And then I think the final point, I think, then links to what Peter was saying is, and Natasha, is how do you, whether you're talking about sort of parental rights, I mean, we do a lot of work on diversity and inclusion. All of these things are about good workplaces.
Yeah.
Right, and I think the real danger is, and the real challenge, I think, particularly for people in HR functions, I mean, we've got an employment bill, it's coming at you. You know, you've got recruitment, you've got like a million things to do, and I think the big risk is that you have almost too many initiatives and not enough sort of assessment of the ones that have the most impact. And really, you know, we were talking in the room behind earlier about, you know, is it better to be doing, you know, less, like really, really well, rather than trying to do everything for everybody all the time, and how you get the information from within your business, whether it's through employee forums or surveys or whatever else it might be, to be able to inform that. But certainly from a retail point of view, there are some big industry-wide issues that you don't need any data to kind of like tell you that it's important, because literally you can, you know, we all as members of the public can see it as we walk down the street. We don't necessarily need a survey to be able to see the consequences of some of that. And I think that's what takes us back to the burning platform.
Thank you. And I think it makes a key point around when you get the data, how do you make sense of it? Because, you know, any good board in this country are going to be looking at customers, they're going to be looking at operations, they're going to be looking at finance, they're going to be looking at community, they're going to be looking at people. So they have got conflicting focus and priorities. So anything that we can do to make the life of the board simpler in terms of where you focus your attention has got to be a good thing. I want to thank the panel. Every single one of these people on here today could talk at least all day on this topic and on any other people-related topic, because we are in a world where every time we switch on the TV, look at our phone, everything we see and hear and feel is about people. It's us, it's our world. And, you know, these are all passionate people. You're all passionate. Every single one of us can make a difference. Peter, I just want to give the opportunity to you to give some closing remarks around if you've got a board that isn't listening, you know, if you're sat in the audience and you're of the 50% that perhaps haven't got a robust strategy, what would your advice be?
Well, I remember an American CEO a long time ago telling me, he said, "In God we trust," you know, that's written on every dollar bill. "Everyone else must bring data." And you know, as Natasha's side, it was.
I love it.
Well, I think it does actually, Hannah. But yes, I mean, it's important to talk about smaller businesses, because whilst we can talk about these big strategic things, and you know, when I said half businesses don't necessarily have a strategy, when you're a small business, this can look like, oh, it's a bit of a luxury, and I'm not sure quite what to do anyway. But I know I need to support my people somehow. But I think it still brings you back to the key point, which is make this a board agenda. Make it an executive agenda. Because at the end of the day, you know, particularly when we talk about things like mental health, it's not always about throwing tons of money at things. I mean, the most important thing I think we've learned about mental health in the workplace over the last several years is to start to talk about it. You know, Martin, you made that point about encouraging people to open up a bit more. In fact, I think we've all made those kind of points. But it starts from the top. If the leadership is not talking about these things, and believe me, leadership is not immune from its own mental health challenges, then we're not going to encourage and open up that conversation in the rest of the organisation. So a lot of it, I think it is, and I think we've all said, you know, about things like culture, is to encourage more openness of these kinds of things. Certainly when I came into work, I think a lot of us came into work, these weren't on the agenda at all, right? You came to work, you shut up and you do what you're bloody well told, and that was the end of it. Thank goodness things have changed, and particularly with younger generations coming into the workforce, they demand more of a voice. They say that I am a whole person, I'm a real person, I'm not some widget that turns up at work. And we need to understand some of these things. So as I said, it's not, although yes, small business is such a critical part of the economy, and we have a bit of a habit of overcomplicating things. I think you could reduce it back to some of these absolute principles. Let's have more open cultures. Let's encourage that openness to discussion. Yes, I think there's more we need to do to train line managers on lots of things related to people and people management. Yeah. But let's not also forget, when we keep talking about line managers, that the line managers are often under the most pressure. So, one of my favourite charts I use when I talk about this is a curve of well-being based on your life, your age. And it literally goes like this. And it peaks in your late teens, early 20s, when you're still a little bit idealistic. You think, isn't the world wonderful? I've got this opportunity. All that's probably changing these days. And then it drops down, and it drops significantly. And the lowest point is around your sort of mid-career, mid-life stage. Because when you talk about financial well-being, you've got children to worry about, you've got all these other things that are going on in your life, you've got uncertainty, where am I going with my career? Thank goodness I'm on the up curve on the other side now. So that'll be my last point. Speak about this openly, but do support your line managers. Don't just put it all on them and say, you've got to deal with this with your team. You've got to support your line managers as well. And if you can do that top down, then it starts to flow through the system. And then we'll start to talk about these things collectively. And then you can bring some of that insight back to the board and back to the executive and say, this is what we're hearing. And these are the things that would most make the difference if we focused on it. And don't overcomplicate, which, as I said, I think we've had a habit of doing on too many subjects actually in business over the years.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to the panel. In God we trust, right? We heard it here. That'll be on the T-shirts that are in your bag at the end of the day. But, my hope is that when we come to Finwell 25, we've moved the dial. That Helen can say that actually people are taking action against the frontline workers that are being abused, that Peter will say actually there's more conversations going on and that strategy is taking a different stand. That Martin can say there's a greater connection between how his people feel and the work in which they're doing, and the fact that their mental health is in a better place than it was. And Natasha can come back and keep sharing with us the great stuff that can be done at Tesco. So you as well, one of you might be up on this panel next year telling us about what you've done as a result of today and the fact that you have put mental health and well-being right at the top of the agenda for the board. So thank you very much. Thank you.